in spirit and prayer.
My name is Greg Rupik, and I'm a contributing editor for With One Accord. For this issue on conversion, we're grateful to have with us Dr. Mary Jo McDonald. Mary Jo is a hospital chaplain and theologian in Port Dover, Ontario. Mary Jo earned her THD at Regis College here in Toronto, writing a thesis on the works of 20th century Jesuit theologian Bernard Lonergan. Mary Jo, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure.
So by way of introduction, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about Lonergan. How did you move from a healthcare setting to theological study, and what drew you to Lonergan in particular?
Thank you, Greg. I've had my own journey of conversion, my crossroad moment where I experienced something much greater than myself happened close to midlife when my husband died. And so I would say at that time I had a personal encounter with Jesus that really shaped where my life moved from there on. I would say that earlier my spiritual journey, I was more dutiful, more focused on doing the things that I ought to do, following church practices and so on. After that time, that encounter with Jesus, I felt a shift happen. And I felt, it was during my midlife. I was approaching midlife at that time. And I became then more aware of my spiritual journey, the actual journey that I was on. And that took me to, at the same time, I noticed I was desiring a more contemplative prayer life, having prayed with my imagination and having more rote prayer. I found that I was more drawn to a prayer of inner quiet and stillness. And I had a spiritual director at the time who was very helpful on facilitating my journey to a contemplative prayer. But then I also went on an Ignatius 40-day spiritual exercise retreat. And during that 40 days of silence, became very aware of what was going on in my interior life, of the shadow that lived there, the things that Carl Jung would say we don't particularly like about ourselves. And so from there, I really longed to study theology. I longed to find out more about who we are in our relationship with Jesus. So reading Lonergan's work, or studying Lonergan's work when I first went to Regis, was like a drink that satisfied a deep thirst, because he articulated how it is. He articulated the interior processes inside the human person in our relationship with Jesus, with God. And I recognize the importance of his work in my ongoing spiritual journey, and also for my own conversion process, and also in my pastoral practice as a hospital chaplain and also as a spiritual director. So that's what started me on my journey to this point today.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And it's great to have started with kind of your own conversation, your own recollection of your journey, your own conversion. As we know, conversion is a theme that plays throughout the Bible. We hear Jesus's own calls for conversion frequently in the Gospels. So how specifically does Lonergan help us to understand that idea of conversion? What light did he shed on that process of conversion for you?
So I would have to say that Bernard Lonergan was one of the most important theologians and philosophers in our modern time. And he's a world-recognized theologian. What he did was he helped to shift our once static idea of ourselves in the world to one of that we are involved in an evolution. Just like the world continues to evolve, we also continue to evolve. And we witness this evolution in humanity as we trace ourselves from our earliest beginnings as cave dwellers through to stone and bronze ages to the modern culture we live in today. We can see that our values have changed, what we know has developed. Technology, our societal and political structures within which we live are all testaments to the human capacity to become more. Lonergan calls this human capacity to evolve self-transcendence. And he also identified that as in nature, it's an organic process.
Hmm.
Our unfolding in our interior life, we are brought up into higher and new forms and ways of being, just like in nature. So what Lonergan has done has described who we are as human beings in relationship to God in a new way by looking at the interior processes within which we know, within which we decide, and come to love God and one another. He describes our human spirit as a questioning human spirit. And this questioning human spirit prompts us. It's a natural thing, and that happens every day. And you see it in toddlers. Why this, what this? It's a questioning spirit that prompts us in this process of knowing and deciding. And I'll say more about that later. But that was the first time that people started to observe who we are in our interior processes. And that was a great achievement. I think one of his greatest achievements. But what is more interesting to me in terms of my own transformation process is that he identified not only that our spirit prompts us to know and decide, but it also prompts us to observe ourselves in these processes, to observe the patterns so that we can catch ourselves either responding and cooperating or not. And he calls this practice of observing ourselves or self-awareness, self-appropriation. And it strikes me that this is one of his greatest contributions because we all work and live in places where we meet very good intentioned people who wreak havoc in our environment because they're oblivious to their blind spots. In other words, they work against these promptings. And we're there too. It's us too. For example, there's things we don't want to know. There's things, judgments we want to make or decisions we want to make that involve our own self-interest rather than the good of all.
Mm-hmm.
And so what Lonergan did by identifying the fact that we can observe ourselves has given us a newfound responsibility, an important tool to catch ourselves as not responding, not cooperating with the promptings and with God's grace. And so, this is a really important, I feel this is a very important tool. It caught my attention in a big way because it helped me in my own conversion processes. And so I chose my theological studies because I recognized my own need for help in this way, and also the fact that it could help me in my pastoral work as a chaplain and spiritual director.
Mm-hmm. And so in case of conversion in particular, does Lonergan have a sense of, are there different kinds of conversion for him? Is conversion of a piece, is it all the same? Can you say just something briefly about maybe how he understands conversion explicitly?
Sure. And to do that, I'll have to talk a little bit about what those interior patterns are when we know things and when we decide things, because conversion involves what happens on each of those areas. But first of all, I want to say that we often think of conversion as, someone accepting a set of beliefs and then joining a faith community. And that's not what he means by that. What Lonergan means by conversion is just how we genuinely engage in cooperating with the dictates or the promptings of our spirit to know. But I want to give example of someone of St. Paul in his letter to the Romans, because this depicts for me the human state we're all in, where we're kind of grapple with our own human weaknesses. So St. Paul says, I do not understand what I do. For the good I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. I think all of us can identify with him in that.
Yeah.
And so from what I understand, Lonergan has contributed, he's giving us tools to help all of us deal with this human condition of weaknesses. So I'd like to just at this point talk a little bit about what the interior patterns are by which we know and decide, and how he talks about conversion at each of those levels.
Sure.
So
Sounds good.
first of all, in what this is called is a theological anthropology. That's the term he used. And what it is just describing humans, who they are in their interiority in relationship to God's grace. So as I mentioned, the human spirit is all of the promptings for our becoming are driven by our human spirit's desire to know. He describes it as an intentional desire to know. We're a questioning spirit. And toddlers, if you've ever, are always asking why this and what is that, and that's the nature of our spirit. And it continues to prompt us through any experience we have. So for instance, I see smoke in the distance and I might ask, I have an experience of seeing smoke in the distance. And so I'll be curious and I'll ask, well, what is that? What's going on? So at that point, my intellect starts to form a hypothesis. Could it be a brush fire? Or could it be a house on fire? So those are two hypotheses. The truth that I arrive at only comes if I go to the source and check out which of these hypotheses is true. So in this instance, I have to go over there, and find out. But once I've judged that this certain hypothesis is the correct one, then in that judgment, I have truth. I have reality. I have being. Those are all philosophical terms. What intellectual conversion means is that I go the distance to make that judgment. So often in our culture, we will accept hypotheses as truth. So for instance, I see someone walking down the street that I know, and I look at them to say hello, and they walk by and don't say hello. So I form a hypothesis. I think, oh, they're angry with me, or they don't like me. And if I accept either one of those as the truth and not go to the person and check it out and say, are you angry? Are you upset with me? Then our culture often does that, but that is not the truth. Intellectual conversion is when I realize I need to make the judgment of which hypothesis is correct. We are prompted further then, once we have truth, we are prompted further to act, to make a decision about what to do with the information we have. And so we move to another level of our interiority, where we make decisions. And this is called the existential moment. And we get to decide. When we make a decision, our hearts are involved because we are making decisions based on what we value. I can make a decision about what is just good for me. The food I have or whatever, I'll just keep for me, or the money, my goods, I just keep for myself or for my own. Moral conversion means that my heart is enlarged to the point where I desire what is good. So what is good for me, I desire that for everyone. So if it's good for me to have health care, if it's good for me to have breakfast in the morning, then it's good for everyone to have that same good. So I'm morally converted when I have shifted, when my value system has shifted and I desire. Lonergan often says that intellectual and moral conversion come on the heels of a religious conversion. And like in my own story, that means I've encountered the love of God. And it changes the ground that I stand on.
So when we read the word conversion or repentance in the Gospels, it's often a translation of that Greek word metanoia.
Yes.
And etymologically, that comes from the two Greek words meta, which is usually after, and nous, which is mind or thought, right? And so it's the mind one has after an event like that. And so it's like a changing of mind. But your own research explored how the human body is actually a part of that process. Could you share what role the body plays in conversion?
Yes. So I picked up a book one time when in the middle of my theological studies, and it was on neuroplasticity. And as I started reading it, I was struck by how it talked about how our brain's ability to create new neural pathways in response to our intention to learn something. So if I want to learn to play the piano or learn to dance, several of my cortices in the brain get involved. The one that processes motor, the one that processes visual, the auditory cortex, all of these get involved, and neural pathways develop in response to me practicing and wanting to play the piano in this, for instance. So that struck me as really connecting with what Lonergan talked about. Our human spirit prompts us, that it's the nature of our human spirit is the desire to know. And so I thought, it's not only our intellectual processes, it's not only our heart and our psyche that are involved, our body, our neurophysiology is involved in this evolutionary unfolding and transformation of the human person. So one of the things the books talked about was that each person's neurophysiology, neural pathways are like a fingerprint. There's a basic structure that's there, but who I am and what I want to learn and what my interests are shape the neural pathways in my own particular way. And so I was struck by that, and also struck by the fact that the body is not static. It's very much has a spontaneity to it. It's very much involved. So they talk about the spontaneity of our neurons wanting to, like, they're born into our brains every day, new neurons, and they're wanting to be accessed somehow. So whatever we're involved in learning, they'll be transported to be used to make neural pathways for that. And so, but the spontaneity also means that the nervous system wants, desires, or is prompted, or has a spontaneity to take a higher form. So for instance, it talked about how we're very involved in learning to play the piano, for instance. We can dream about that the next day, that it takes symbolic form in our dream. And then in our waking consciousness, we can think about and understand those experiences in a new way. So that was the first thing that really struck me. The second thing was that it talked about how every experience we have in our lifetime is neurologically encoded in our nervous system. So there's much more there than we can know consciously. When we want to know something, our nervous system, associates it with previous experiences so that we can draw on that in the present situation as we're learning something. One of the persons that I also studied was Eugene Genlin, and he talked about body knowledge. And I later, understood that body knowledge just means that all of our experiences are encoded in our nervous system. But he was saying that when things are repressed, when we've had traumatic experiences, that means that certain areas, we aren't able to access them when we need them to learn, something that's going on in our present day. So he talked about tools that he developed, which is called focusing on the felt experience. And if you ever sit quietly and alone, we're often tempted to distract ourselves when we sit quietly and are alone, because we might unconsciously feel that our body's a little jittery, or our thoughts, we've got these thoughts firing off all over the place. So he talked about focusing our consciousness inward. So right now we're focused outward as we converse with one another. But this is a matter of focusing our consciousness inward on the felt experience in our body and staying there, just staying present to it, and asking Jesus to be present in love with us, in that being with our felt experience in our body. I liken it to putting your thumb on a knot in your muscle. When you just press that gently, sometimes there's a release. So that focusing actually helps to release something that's been repressed in our neurophysiology. And often what happens is that it comes into our consciousness and allows us to interpret it and understand what previously has been held down.
I wonder if kind of in closing, you might have some words of wisdom for those of us kind of attempting to do something similar. What would you suggest the viewers of this video and those who listen to this interview? What could we do to help to develop a deeper awareness, especially of our own body's roles in our lives of faith?
I think what Lonergan has given us is really, we needed, our world needs to be more conscious, more aware of what's being prompted in us. Throughout my day, I might have a conversation with someone and afterwards feel a little prompting to pay attention to what was said, because something has stayed there. Maybe it was a word that was said, or just something doesn't sit right. So I bring that at the end of the day, or in the moment sometimes, I focus a little bit on that and see what comes up. What does God want me to know?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important practice to do throughout your day, but also at the end of the day too. We are so distracted normally in our day by so much going on. It's really vital. Even if we don't particularly feel called to contemplative prayer, it's really important to have some moment in our day to turn our mind's eye inward
Mm-hmm.
and to be present to ourselves. Because what I know is that God desires a deep, intimate friendship with us. St. Elizabeth of the Trinity says, let yourself be loved. Because one of the things that I learned in neuroplasticity is that when we experience love, it changes our neural pathways.
Mm-hmm.
It allows us to bond in a new way with the beloved. So being present in love with Jesus is the way we experience healness and wholeness and full union and fulfillment of our being.
Mary Jo, this is a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. And of course, blessings on all of your future work.
Thank you very much, Greg. It's been my honor.